I'm Sarah, 28, and for years my parents treated me like their live-in maid while showering my younger brother with everything. They made me cook, clean, and serve at their fancy dinner parties while he got praised for just existing. Last month, they threw their biggest networking event yet, desperately trying to impress some big-shot CEO to boost Dad's failing business. When that CEO walked in and called me boss in front of everyone, the look on my parents' faces was priceless. What happened next completely destroyed our family forever. Hey everyone, before we dive into this wild family revenge story, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. If you love drama-filled family stories where justice finally gets served, smash that like button and hit subscribe because this story has more twists than a soap opera. Trust me, you won't see this ending coming. Growing up in the Morrison household meant understanding your place in the hierarchy, and mine was firmly at the bottom. My parents, Robert and Linda Morrison, had their perfect vision of success mapped out, and somehow I never fit into that picture the way my younger brother Jake did. Jake was everything they wanted in a child. Charismatic, athletic, studying business at an expensive private college. He was going to take over Dad's commercial real estate firm someday, they said. He was their investment, their future, their pride and joy. Me, I was just there, the reliable one, the one who made sure everything ran smoothly so they could focus on their golden boy. From the time I was 12, I was responsible for keeping our massive suburban house spotless. While other kids were at sleepovers or soccer practice, I was learning how to properly fold fitted sheets and scrub baseboards. Sarah's so responsible mom would brag to her friends. She just naturally loves taking care of things. What she really meant was that I had no choice. Every evening when Dad came home from work, he expected dinner on the table, his favorite scotch poured, and the house immaculate. Mom spent her days at yoga classes and charity committee meetings playing the part of the successful businessman's wife. When she came home, she'd run her finger along surfaces looking for dust, inspecting my work like a drill sergeant. "Sarah, the bathroom tiles need more attention," she'd say, not even looking at me. "And make sure you use the good china tonight. Jake's bringing his girlfriend over." Jake's girlfriend. Jake's friends. Jake's achievements. Everything revolved around Jake. When he made Dean's List, they threw a party. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, they took me to Applebee's and spent the whole dinner talking about Jake's intramural basketball team. The worst part wasn't the chores or even the obvious favoritism. It was the way they talked about me to their friends and colleagues. At their frequent dinner parties, networking events disguised as social gatherings, I was essentially the hired help. I'd spend hours preparing elaborate meals, serving drinks, and cleaning up, all while they introduced Jake as our son, the future business owner, and barely acknowledged my existence. "Sarah's our little helper," Dad would say with a patronizing smile when someone asked about me. "She keeps us all in line." Their guests would chuckle and move on, never bothering to ask what I did for work or what my plans were. I was invisible, a piece of furniture that occasionally brought appetizers. What they didn't know was that while they were grooming Jake to inherit a struggling real estate business, I was quietly building something extraordinary. After high school, I'd taken a job as an assistant at a small tech startup downtown. The pay was terrible, but I was fascinated by the work. I taught myself coding in the evenings after finishing my household duties, staying up until 2 a.m. learning Python and JavaScript. My parents never asked about my job. They assumed I was just another secretary filing papers and answering phones. "At least she's working," Mom would tell her friends with a slight embarrassment, as if having a daughter with a regular job was somehow beneath them. But I wasn't just working. I was learning, growing, and slowly climbing the ladder. Within 2 years, I'd been promoted to junior developer. A year later, I was leading small projects. My salary had tripled, but I never mentioned it at home. I kept living in my childhood bedroom, contributing to household expenses and playing the role they'd assigned me. The tech industry moves fast, and I moved with it. I jumped companies twice, each time for significantly more money and responsibility. By 25, I was a senior developer at a mid-sized software company. By 27, I was their youngest ever engineering manager, overseeing a team of 15 developers on million-dollar projects. Still at home, I was just Sarah the helper. I'd come home from managing complex software deployments and multi-million-dollar budgets to find a list of chores waiting on my bed. The guest bathroom needs deep cleaning, it would say in Mom's precise handwriting. The Hendersons are coming for dinner Thursday. The Hendersons, the Williamses, the Johnsons, there was always someone coming for dinner. Dad's business had been struggling for years, losing clients to more modern firms with better technology and fresher ideas. His solution was to throw increasingly elaborate dinner parties, hoping to charm his way into bigger deals. I became an expert at these events. I knew exactly how Mr. Dinner Parties. Peterson liked his steak medium rare with just a touch of garlic, that Mrs. Chen was allergic to shellfish, and that the Rodriguezes always complimented the wine selection. I planned menus coordinated with caterers for the larger events and made sure every detail was perfect. Meanwhile, Jake would breeze in halfway through these parties, fresh from another college adventure, and immediately become the center of attention. He'd tell stories about his business classes, his internships, his plans to revolutionize the family company. The guests would nod approvingly while I refilled their wine glasses, invisible as always. "Jake has such vision," they'd say. "You must be so proud." And my parents would beam like he'd just won a Nobel Prize for talking about synergy and market penetration. The breaking point was supposed to be Jake's graduation party last spring. They'd invited everyone: clients, competitors, industry leaders. The guest list read like a who's who of the local business community. For weeks beforehand, Mom obsessed over every detail. The flowers had to be perfect, the food exceptional, the whole event flawlessly executed. "This is Jake's moment," she told me, while reviewing the catering menu for the 100th time. "Everyone needs to see what kind of family we are, what kind of man we've raised." I spent 3 days straight preparing for that party, coordinating with vendors, setting up decorations, managing logistics. The night of the event, I worked like a machine, greeting guests, directing traffic, solving problems before my parents even knew they existed. Jake gave a speech about his bright future in the family business. Dad spoke about legacy and tradition. Mom glowed with pride. And I cleaned up wine spills and collected empty plates, wondering when I'd stopped being their daughter and become their employee. That night, lying in bed, surrounded by the detritus of someone else's celebration, I made a decision that would change everything. The Monday after Jake's graduation party, I walked into my boss's office and did something that would have shocked my parents if they'd bothered to pay attention. I quit my job to start my own company. Not because I was unhappy at work. Quite the opposite. I'd been headhunted by 3 different companies in the past 6 months, and my current employer had just offered me a promotion to VP of Engineering. But I had bigger plans that had been brewing since I was 16, and coding basic websites for local businesses for $20 each. The tech world was shifting toward AI and machine learning, and I'd seen an opportunity that nobody else was capitalizing on. Small to medium businesses were drowning in data but had no idea how to use it effectively. They needed AI solutions but couldn't afford the big consulting firms that charged hundreds of thousands for implementations. My idea was simple: create an AI platform that could analyze business data and provide actionable insights at a fraction of the traditional cost. Make it user-friendly enough for non-technical business owners but powerful enough to actually drive results. I'd been working on the prototype in secret for 8 months, coding until dawn while my parents slept peacefully upstairs. I called it DataWise AI, and I was about to bet everything on it. The hardest part wasn't the technical challenges or even the business planning. It was maintaining the charade at home. Every morning I'd put on business casual clothes and leave the house as if I was going to my old job. Instead, I'd head to the tiny office space I'd rented downtown, a cramped room above a coffee shop that cost me $1,200 a month I could barely afford. My savings from years of secret salary increases became my startup capital. While my parents assumed I was making maybe 40,000 a year, I'd actually been pulling in close to six figures. Living at home and contributing just a token amount to household expenses had allowed me to save aggressively. It wasn't enough to live luxuriously, but it was enough to fund a lean startup for about 18 months if I was careful. The first few months were brutal. I was doing everything myself: coding, marketing, sales, customer service. I survived on coffee shop pastries and whatever leftovers I could find at home. My parents noticed I looked tired, but they attributed it to work stress and reminded me that Jake never seemed stressed about his internship. Jake's internship at Dad's company was going about as well as expected. He spent most of his time reorganizing filing systems and sitting in on meetings where he contributed nothing but enthusiastic nodding. Dad kept talking about preparing him for leadership, but everyone could see that Jake had inherited all of their charm and none of their work ethic. Meanwhile, DataWise AI was slowly gaining traction. My first client was a local restaurant chain that was struggling to understand their customer patterns. Using their sales data, I built them a system that could predict busy periods, optimize staffing, and identify their most profitable menu items. Within 3 months, they'd increased their profit margins by 15%. Word spread quickly in the business community. The restaurant owner told his accountant, who told his other clients, who started reaching out to me. By month 6, I had 12 clients and a waiting list. By month 9, I had to hire my first employee, a brilliant recent graduate named Marcus who could code circles around most senior developers. The growth was intoxicating but also terrifying. I was making more money than I'd ever imagined, but I couldn't tell anyone. At home, I was still expected to have dinner ready at 6 sharp and to deep clean the bathrooms every weekend. My parents had no idea that their little helper was building a company that would soon be worth more than Dad's entire struggling business. The turning point came when I landed my biggest client yet, Meridian Manufacturing, a mid-sized company that made specialized equipment for hospitals. Their CEO, Patricia Chen, had heard about my work through her network and wanted to meet. What should have been a simple sales meeting turned into something much bigger. Patricia was everything my parents pretended to be: successful, respected, genuinely influential in the business community. She was also brilliant, asking technical questions that most of my clients couldn't even pronounce. After a 2-hour presentation where I demonstrated how DataWise AI could optimize her supply chain and predict maintenance needs, she made me an offer I couldn't refuse. "I don't just want to hire you," she said, leaning back in her leather chair. "I want to invest in you. Your platform is exactly what the market needs, and you're clearly the person to build it." Her investment offer was substantial enough to let me quit pretending I had a regular job, hire a proper team, and move into real office space. But more than the money, Patricia offered something I'd never had at home: recognition. She saw my potential and wanted to help me reach it. "You remind me of myself at your age," she told me as we shook hands on the deal. "Brilliant, ambitious, and probably underestimated by everyone around you." If only she knew how right she was. With Patricia's investment and mentorship, DataWise AI exploded. We moved into a sleek downtown office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the river. I hired a sales team, a marketing manager, and enough developers to handle our growing client base. We were featured in the local business journal, won an innovation award from the Chamber of Commerce, and started getting inquiries from companies 3 states away. Through it all, I maintained my double life. Every evening I'd change into old clothes and slip back into my role as the family servant. I'd cook dinner, clean the kitchen, and listen to my parents worry about Dad's business while planning my next product expansion. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. By day, I was CEO of a rapidly growing tech company making decisions that affected dozens of employees and millions of dollars in revenue. By night, I was scrubbing toilets and being lectured about not folding the towels correctly. But I had a plan, and it was bigger than just proving myself. I was going to wait for the perfect moment, the right opportunity to reveal the truth in a way that would maximum impact. I wanted my parents to understand not just what they'd missed, but what they'd lost. That opportunity was coming sooner than I expected, and it would involve the most important dinner party of my parents' lives. Dad's commercial real estate business was circling the drain, and everyone knew it except him. Hartwell Properties had been bleeding clients for 2 years straight, losing deals to younger, more tech-savvy competitors who actually understood what modern businesses needed. While Dad was still showing properties with printed brochures and handshake agreements, his competitors were using virtual reality tours and automated contract systems. The writing was on the wall, but Dad was too proud to read it. Instead of adapting, he doubled down on his old-school networking approach, convinced that the right dinner party with the right people would solve everything. His latest obsession was landing Alexander Kane as a client. Kane was the CEO of Kane Industries, a massive manufacturing conglomerate that was planning to expand their operations into our city. They were looking for someone to handle the acquisition and development of a $50 million industrial complex, the kind of deal that could save Dad's company and set Jake up for life. If we can get Kane to that dinner party, Dad told Mom over breakfast one morning, everything changes. This is our shot. Kane was notoriously difficult to impress and famously selective about who he worked with. He'd turned down pitches from 3 of Dad's biggest competitors, apparently finding them all unimpressive and backwards thinking. Dad was convinced that his personal touch, his old-world charm, would be the difference. What Dad didn't know was that Kane Industries was already one of my biggest clients. I'd been working with them for 8 months, implementing an AI system that optimized their supply chain logistics across 17 facilities. My platform had saved them over $2 million in operational costs and earned me a personal commendation from Alexander Kane himself. We'd spoken dozens of times, both in formal meetings and casual phone calls. He knew me as Sarah Morrison, CEO of DataWise AI, the brilliant young entrepreneur who was revolutionizing how his company handled data analysis. He had no idea I was also the daughter of Robert Morrison from Hartwell Properties, the man who'd been desperately trying to get a meeting with him for months. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. While Dad was pulling every string he could to get Kane's attention, Kane was already singing my praises to anyone who'd listen. At the last industry conference, he'd introduced me to a room full of executives as one of the most innovative minds I've ever encountered. When Dad finally managed to convince Kane to attend a dinner party at our house, probably by name-dropping every mutual connection he could think of, I realized I had a choice to make. I could reveal my identity to Kane beforehand, potentially ruining Dad's chances but maintaining my secret a little longer. Or I could let the evening play out naturally and see what happened when 2 worlds collided. I chose chaos. The weeks leading up to the dinner party were a masterclass in Morrison family dysfunction. Mom threw herself into planning with the manic energy of someone whose entire future depended on the perfect appetizer selection. She hired additional catering staff, rented upgraded linens, and changed the menu 17 times. This wasn't just a dinner party, it was a performance, and failure wasn't an option. Everything has to be absolutely flawless, she told me while reviewing the seating chart for the 100th time. Kane is used to the finest things. He needs to see that we're his kind of people. Dad, meanwhile, practiced his pitch constantly. I'd find him in his study at all hours, rehearsing his presentation about Hartwell Properties' innovative approach to commercial real estate. It was painful to watch, knowing that Kane was already working with a company that actually understood innovation. Jake was equally excited, seeing this as his moment to make a real impression. This is it, he told me one evening, while I was preparing his laundry. After Kane sees what the Morrison family is all about, I'll basically have my career handed to me. The guest list was a who's who of local business elite. Everyone my parents had ever wanted to impress, all gathered to witness what they hoped would be their triumphant moment. The pressure was enormous, and it all fell on my shoulders to execute flawlessly. I spent the week before the party in a strange state of anticipation. At DataWise AI, my team was working on our largest project yet, a citywide traffic optimization system that would revolutionize urban planning. I was negotiating a partnership with a major Silicon Valley firm and fielding calls from investors who wanted to fund our next expansion. Then I'd come home and spend hours polishing silverware and arranging flowers, listening to my parents stress about impressing a man who already considered me a close business partner and personal friend. You know, there's something beautifully twisted about watching your parents panic over impressing someone who already respects you more than they ever have. If you're loving this family karma story so far, imagine how much sweeter it's about to get. We're right at the turning point where everything I've been building in secret is about to explode into the open. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when Alexander Kane walks through our front door. The night before the party, I had a long phone call with Alexander about a technical issue with his newest facility's data integration. We talked for over an hour, solving problems and joking about the challenges of scaling AI systems. At one point, he mentioned he was attending a dinner party the next evening. Some local real estate guy, he said with mild amusement. Robert, something. My assistant insisted it would be good for community relations. That sounds interesting, I managed, trying to keep the irony out of my voice. Probably will be boring as hell, but I promised I'd make an appearance. These small-town networking events are usually painful, but you never know who you might meet. If only he knew. That night, I barely slept. Tomorrow would either be the most satisfying moment of my life or a complete disaster that destroyed everything I'd worked for. There were so many variables, so many ways it could go wrong, but there was also the potential for perfect poetic justice. As I lay in bed listening to my parents moving around upstairs, probably still obsessing over last-minute details, I thought about all the years of being invisible, of being taken for granted, of watching them pour their love and attention into Jake while treating me like hired help. Tomorrow, that would all change. One way or another, the truth was coming out. The morning of the party dawned gray and drizzly, which Mom took as a personal insult from the universe. She was a nervous wreck by 10 a.m., changing clothes 3 times and reorganizing the living room furniture twice. Dad locked himself in his study, running through his presentation one final time. And me, I put on my apron, tied my hair back, and got ready to serve the dinner party that would change everything. The evening of the dinner party arrived with all the tension of a live wire. By 5 p.m., our house had been transformed into what Mom hoped would pass for sophisticated elegance. Crystal glasses sparkled under the dining room chandelier, fresh orchids adorned every surface, and the smell of herb-crusted salmon filled the air. I'd been cooking and preparing since dawn, moving through the familiar choreography of serving my family's ambitions. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was preparing to meet my biggest client as if I were meeting him for the first time, all while pretending to be nothing more than the family's live-in help. Dad emerged from his study at exactly 6 p.m., wearing his best suit and the kind of nervous energy that made everyone around him jumpy. He'd been rehearsing his pitch so much that I'd heard it through the walls at least 50 times. Hartwell Properties represents traditional values with modern vision, he'd say, completely unaware that his idea of modern was about a decade behind the curve. Jake arrived fashionably late, as always wearing a designer shirt that probably cost more than most people's rent. He immediately positioned himself in the living room where he could make the best first impression on Kane, practicing his firm handshake and preparing his talking points about synergistic business paradigms. Mom fluttered around like a hummingbird, adjusting flowers that didn't need adjusting and checking details that had already been checked. Sarah, make sure the wine glasses are spotless, she hissed as the first guests began arriving. And remember, you're to stay in the background unless someone specifically needs something. The early arrivals were the usual suspects: the Hendersons, the Williamses, a few other business owners who moved in Dad's increasingly smaller circle. They made polite conversation about the weather and the local economy, but everyone was really waiting for the guest of honor. Alexander Kane arrived at exactly 7:30, which was perfectly punctual and entirely typical of him. I watched through the kitchen doorway as he stepped through our front door, and the shift in the room's energy was immediate. This was a man who commanded attention without trying, whose presence made everyone else stand a little straighter. Dad practically bounced forward to greet him, pumping his hand with enthusiasm. Mr. Kane, such an honor to have you in our home. Alexander smiled politely, the way powerful people do when they're being gracious but not particularly interested. Thank you for the invitation, Robert. Lovely home. I retreated to the kitchen, my heart hammering as I prepared the first course. This was it, the moment I'd been planning for months. In about 30 minutes, when it came time to serve dinner, I would walk into that dining room and watch my parents' world explode. The cocktail hour proceeded exactly as expected. Dad worked the room like a politician, making sure everyone understood the importance of the evening. Jake positioned himself strategically near Kane, waiting for the perfect moment to make his impression. Mom supervised everything with military precision, occasionally shooting meaningful looks in my direction. I moved through my duties like an actress preparing for the performance of her life. I served appetizers, refilled drinks, and smiled politely when guests thanked me without really seeing me. Mrs. Henderson even patted my arm and told Mom, "You're so lucky to have such helpful family," without realizing the layers of irony in that statement. At 8 p.m. sharp, Mom announced that dinner was served. The guests filed into our dining room with Alexander Kane seated at the place of honor to Dad's right. I began serving the first course, a butternut squash soup that had taken me 2 hours to prepare perfectly. As I placed the bowl in front of Alexander, he looked up with the polite smile people reserve for service staff. For a split second, our eyes met, and I saw the exact moment recognition dawned. His expression shifted from polite disinterest to confusion to something approaching shock. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying just enough surprise to make the nearby guests look up. The dining room went quiet. Dad looked confused, clearly wondering how Kane knew his daughter's name. Mom's face showed the beginning of panic. Had I somehow embarrassed them already? "Hello, Alexander," I said calmly, setting down his soup. "It's nice to see you again." The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Kane looked around the table, clearly putting pieces together. Dad's face was cycling through emotions I'd never seen before. Jake's mouth was actually hanging open. "I'm sorry," Dad said slowly. "Do you two know each other?" Alexander looked at me, then at Dad, then back at me. I could see him processing the family resemblance, the implications, the sheer impossibility of the situation. "Sarah," he said carefully, "is your father, Robert Morrison of Hartwell Properties. He is, I confirmed, moving to serve the next guest, as if this was perfectly normal." Dad's confusion was morphing into something sharper. "Sarah, how do you know Mr. Kane?" The entire table was staring now. Mom had gone pale. Jake looked like someone had just explained quantum physics to him in ancient Greek. The other guests sensed drama, but had no context for understanding it. "We work together," I said, simply ladling soup into Mrs. Henderson's bowl. "Work together," Dad's voice cracked slightly. "Sarah, you work at that little tech company downtown." Alexander Kane, to his credit, was beginning to smile. The man was brilliant. He was starting to see the picture, and he was enjoying it. "Robert," he said slowly, "I think there's something you should know about your daughter." "What kind of work do you do together?" Mom demanded, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. I finished serving the soup and straightened, meeting my parents' eyes for the first time all evening as their equal rather than their servant. "I run DataWise AI, I said calmly. "Alexander is one of my biggest clients." The words hit the dining room like a grenade. Dad's fork clattered against his soup bowl. Mom actually gasped. Jake made a sound like air being let out of a tire. "You—" what Dad whispered. Alexander Kane leaned back in his chair, openly grinning now. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the table, "allow me to properly introduce Sarah Morrison, CEO of DataWise AI, one of the most innovative companies I've had the pleasure of working with. Her AI platform has revolutionized our operational efficiency across 17 facilities." The room erupted in confused murmurs. Dad looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Mom was staring at me as if I'd suddenly grown a second head. "But you live here, Dad," said weakly. "You cook our meals. You clean the bathrooms." "Yes," I agreed. I do all of that. I also run a multi-million-dollar company. Turns out I'm good at multitasking. The aftermath of my revelation was like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. Dad sat frozen in his chair, soup spoon halfway to his mouth, as if moving might make this nightmare real. Mom's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the way all color had drained from her face. Jake looked like someone had just explained that Santa Claus was not only real but had been living in their garage for years. The other dinner guests were experiencing various stages of confusion and fascination. Mrs. Henderson kept looking between me and my parents as if trying to solve a puzzle. Mr. Williams was openly staring, probably recalculating every interaction he'd ever had with the Morrison girl. The room buzzed with whispered conversations as people tried to process what they'd just heard. Alexander Kane was thoroughly enjoying himself. "You know, Robert," he said, taking a leisurely sip of wine, "when you invited me tonight to discuss business opportunities, I had no idea I'd be dining with one of my most valued partners." Dad finally found his voice. "Sarah, this is impossible. You work as a secretary somewhere. You've never mentioned running a company." "I've never mentioned a lot of things," I replied, moving around the table to clear empty soup bowls. "You never asked." The simple truth of that statement hit harder than any accusation could have. In 28 years, my parents had never once asked about my ambitions, my goals, or my dreams. They'd assigned me a role: helpful daughter, reliable cleaner, invisible servant, and never bothered to wonder if there might be more to me. But how? Mom started, then stopped, clearly struggling to form coherent thoughts. Alexander decided to fill the silence. "Your daughter is remarkable, Linda. DataWise AI has saved my company over $2 million in operational costs. Sarah's innovative approach to data analysis is exactly what modern businesses need." He turned to me with genuine warmth. "I've been telling everyone I meet about the brilliant young CEO who's revolutionizing industrial efficiency." Jake finally found his voice. "Wait, so you're like—" Rich, the question was so typically Jake, immediate focus on status and money, that I almost laughed. "I do well for myself," I said diplomatically. How well Dad demanded, his business instincts finally kicking in. "Well enough that I could buy your company," I said, quietly setting down his empty soup bowl. Several times over, the silence that followed was deafening. Dad's face went through several color changes. Mom made a small choking sound. The other guests had given up any pretense of polite conversation and were openly listening. Alexander Kane was grinning like he was watching the best entertainment of his life. Sarah's being modest, he told the table. DataWise AI was just featured in Forbes as one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the region. I believe the valuation was quite impressive. $12 million, I said simply. As of last month's investor meeting. Dad's soup spoon clattered to the table. Mom actually swayed in her chair. Jake's mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. 12 million, Dad croaked. "Give or take," I confirmed. "We're projecting 15 by year-end, assuming the expansion goes according to plan." Mrs. Henderson chose that moment to speak up. "Sarah, dear, I had no idea. When your parents talked about you working at that little company, we all thought. You thought I was a secretary. I finished for her, filing papers and answering phones, making coffee and scheduling appointments." "Well, yes," she admitted, looking embarrassed. "That's what they told you because that's what they assumed," I said, looking directly at my parents. They never bothered to ask what I actually do. The weight of years of indifference hung in the air like smoke. Every dismissive comment, every time they'd introduced me as their little helper, every moment they'd treated me as an afterthought while lavishing attention on Jake, it all crystallized in that dining room. Alexander Kane, who had clearly decided to enjoy this family drama to its fullest, raised his wine glass. "A toast," he announced, "to Sarah Morrison, whose innovation and vision have impressed me more than any business leader I've met in years." The guests, caught between politeness and shock, awkwardly raised their glasses. Dad looked like he was choking on his wine. Mom hadn't touched hers. You know, Robert Alexander continued conversationally, I've been looking for local partners for the industrial complex project. Someone who really understands modern business, who can think strategically about technology integration and efficiency optimization. He paused, letting the words sink in. I think I've found exactly what I need. Dad perked up slightly, hope flickering in his eyes. Yes, that's exactly what we hope to discuss tonight. Hartwell Properties has the experience and vision to— Oh, I wasn't talking about Hartwell Properties, Alexander interrupted gently. I was thinking of offering the contract to DataWise AI. Sarah's already proven she can handle complex logistics, and her understanding of industrial efficiency is unmatched. The hope died in Dad's eyes like a snuffed candle. The $50 million deal he'd been dreaming about was sitting right there at his dinner table, but it belonged to the daughter he'd never bothered to see. That's a consulting contract worth about $8 million over 2 years, Alexander added casually, plus equity in the development project itself. Jake made another one of his fish-out-of-water sounds. Mom was staring at me like I was a stranger who had wandered into her house wearing her daughter's face. But Sarah, Dad said desperately, you could partner with us. Family business, right? You could help Hartwell Properties. The way you helped me? I asked quietly. The way you supported my career, the way you celebrated my achievements, the questions hung in the air unanswered because we all knew the truth. They had never helped me, never supported me, never even noticed my achievements. Everything I'd built alone, in secret, while playing the role of grateful daughter and unpaid servant. I think I said, beginning to clear the table for the main course, we should talk about this later. After dessert. But we all knew that after tonight, nothing would ever be the same in the Morrison household. The perfect family image they'd spent years crafting had just shattered into a million pieces, and standing in the wreckage was the daughter they'd never bothered to know. The rest of dinner passed in a surreal haze. I continued serving courses as if nothing had changed, while my parents sat in stunned silence and their guests whispered among themselves. Alexander Kane, bless him, carried most of the conversation, regaling the table with stories about innovative businesses and the importance of recognizing talent wherever you find it. By the time I served dessert, a chocolate souffle that had taken me 3 attempts to perfect, the shock was beginning to wear off, replaced by something much more complicated. Dad kept staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time, which in many ways he was. Mom had barely touched her food, too overwhelmed to eat. Jake alternated between looking confused and calculating, probably trying to figure out how this affected his own prospects. When the last guest finally left around 10 p.m. after awkward goodbyes and promises to catch up soon, our house felt like a crime scene. The 4 of us stood in the living room, surrounded by the debris of my parents' shattered assumptions. Sarah, Dad began, his voice hoarse from shock. We need to talk. Do we? I asked, untying my apron. Because for 28 years, talking hasn't really been our strong suit. Don't be dramatic, Mom, snapped, finally finding her voice. You deliberately deceived us. Living in our house, letting us think you were just ordinary. Ordinary, I repeated. Is that what you thought I was? You know what I mean, she said defensively. You could have told us about your success. When I challenged, during which of our heart-to-heart conversations about my hopes and dreams, when you were asking about my career goals, when you were celebrating my achievements, the silence stretched until Jake predictably made it worse. So, like, can you give me a job at your company? Since we're family and all. The audacity was breathtaking. A job doing what, Jake? You don't know anything about technology, data analysis, or running a business. I could learn, he said with the confidence of someone who'd never had to learn anything the hard way. I'm really good with people. Are you? I asked. Because you haven't even asked what my company does, how I built it, or what I'm passionate about. You just want to know how you can benefit from it. Dad stepped forward, his businessman instincts finally overriding his shock. Sarah, there are opportunities here for all of us. A family business partnership, combining your technology expertise with our real estate knowledge. Your real estate knowledge, I interrupted. Dad, your business is failing. You're hemorrhaging clients because you refuse to modernize. Alexander Kane told me he's turned down 3 other local firms because they're stuck in the past. That's you. That's your company. The words hit him like physical blows. We could change, he said desperately. With your help, we could adapt, modernize, like you adapted when I was growing up, I asked. Like you modernized your thinking about what your daughter was capable of. Mom finally exploded. That's enough. We provided for you, gave you a roof over your head, fed you, clothed you. You gave me chores, I cut her off. You gave me expectations and responsibilities and never once asked what I wanted for myself. You fed me so I'd have energy to cook for you. You clothed me so I wouldn't embarrass you at your precious dinner parties. We love you, Dad, said weakly. Do you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Do you love me or do you love what I do for you because until tonight you had no idea who I actually am? Alexander Kane had been right when he'd called me impressive. Not because of my technical skills or business acumen, but because I'd managed to build an empire while living under the thumb of people who saw me as nothing more than a convenient servant. I'd coded revolutionary software in the same bedroom where I'd folded their laundry. I'd negotiated million-dollar contracts in the morning and cleaned their bathrooms at night. I'm moving out, I announced. I bought a house last month, downtown near my office. I'll be gone by next weekend. Sarah, please, Mom, said, tears starting to form. Let's talk about this. We can work things out. Can we? I asked. Because I don't think you understand what's really happened here. This isn't just about me having a secret career. This is about 28 years of being invisible in my own family. This is about watching you pour everything into Jake while treating me like hired help. This is about never once asking what I wanted or who I hoped to become. Jake, oblivious as always, tried one more time. But we could be like a tech dynasty now, the Morrison technology empire. I looked at my little brother, golden boy favored son, the one they'd invested all their hopes in, and felt something that might have been pity. Jake, you're 25 years old and you've never held a real job. You've never built anything, created anything, or solved any problems that weren't handed to you with instructions. What exactly would you contribute to a technology empire? The truth of it settled over the room like dust. Jake had been raised to expect success without effort, recognition without achievement. Meanwhile, I'd been working in the shadows, building something extraordinary while being treated as extraordinary ordinary. I'm not angry anymore, I said quietly and realized it was true. I'm not even hurt. I'm just done. Done pretending that cooking your meals and cleaning your house makes us close. Done hoping you'll see me as more than your convenient helper. Done waiting for you to care about who I really am. Dad made one last desperate attempt. The Kane contract. We could split it. Hartwell Properties could handle the real estate aspects while your company Alexander already offered me the entire contract, I interrupted. $8 million over 2 years plus equity in the development. Why would I share that with a company I don't need and people who never invested in me? The math was brutal and unavoidable. Everything they'd hoped to gain from tonight's dinner party was now mine. The connection they desperately wanted, the business opportunity they'd dreamed of, the financial salvation they'd prayed for, it was all sitting across from them in the daughter they'd never bothered to know. You know what the sweetest part of this whole story is. It's not just that I won, it's that I won by becoming everything they never thought I could be. While they were so focused on molding Jake into their idea of success, they completely missed the fact that I was already successful beyond their wildest dreams. This whole experience taught me that sometimes the best revenge isn't planning some elaborate scheme. Sometimes it's just living well enough that the truth speaks for itself. Family loyalty goes both ways, and respect has to be earned, not demanded. I'm curious about your own family stories. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you most? Have you ever had that satisfying moment when you proved everyone wrong? Drop a comment and let me know. I love hearing about those sweet justice moments, where hard work pays off and karma comes full circle. If this story hit home for you, smash that like button because stories about overcoming family expectations and building success on your own terms need to be heard. Subscribe for more real-life drama where the underdog comes out on top, and share this with anyone who's ever felt invisible in their own family. Sometimes we all need a reminder that our worth isn't determined by other people's ability to see it. Thanks for taking this journey with me. And remember, never let anyone else define what you're capable of achieving. The best response to being underestimated is simply becoming undeniable. Until next time, keep building your empire, whatever that looks like for you.